Well, good morning, Facebook friends and members of ACB and the blind community. My name is Eric Bridges, and I work for this great organization. So pleased that you all could join us to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act. We've got some great guests to talk about sort of the journey of the CVAA and what it's meant in the years since its passage to our community. But what I thought we would do first is a great artist and advocate within the blind community wanted to share his thoughts on the CVAA and technology down through time as it has proliferated. That is the word I was trying to say. We are so excited that Stevie Wonder was able to provide us a video to commemorate this great day. So without further ado, let's welcome Stevie.
58 years ago, when I was just getting started in music, AT&T launched the first communication satellite into space. It meant our world was no longer separated by oceans and borders. And suddenly, our planet became much smaller, connected by invisible airways that traveled instantly through heaven. Our world was changing all around us. Suddenly, our voices, our images, and our music could reach anyone, anywhere, at any time. It was the dawn of a digital revolution, what some would call a global village, and it brought with it a new freedom humans had never experienced before. Fast forward almost 50 years, when I got to stand in the East Room of the White House with President Barack Obama to celebrate a new type of digital freedom that was now at our fingertips. We were well into a new digital revolution. Yet, was growing concern that people like myself who were blind, or many others with varying disabilities, would be shut out. Fortunately, thanks to companies like Apple, who introduced a year earlier the first accessible iPhone, we knew what could be done. And thanks to groups like the American Council of the Blind, we knew our voices calling for equality in a changing media and landscape would be heard. That's what made the day in the White House so special when President Obama signed into law the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act. And the industry and advocates gathered together to celebrate the dawn of this new digital freedom. The innovation that has carried us over the past 10 years has been incredible. We don't just carry in our pockets a window to the world. We can carry a knowledge greater than the whole New York Public Library in the palm of our hands. We can add our voice to the voices of millions around the globe who otherwise would have no voice. We can lift up in front of our faces technology that can both see and describe a world around us that may otherwise be unseen. And we can capture our dreams in words, images, and songs whenever our hearts tell us to stop, breathe, and capture the moment. But leadership is critical to continue to drive this digital world for everyone. So thanks to the CVAA, the dreams of a freedom that scatters every millisecond through the heavens, to be carried with us anywhere at any time. So join me today as we not only celebrate 10 years of the CVAA, but we dream of what further freedoms through digital equality lie just over the horizon. Thank you.
That was awesome. So thank you very much to Stevie for providing us that inspirational message this morning, and always good to hear from him. Why don't we go ahead and get introductions started. This morning, we've got a panel of folks that have participated in the lead up to the CVAA, the negotiations for the CVAA on Capitol Hill, and then have continued advocacy work on the implementation of the CVAA after its passage. So with us this morning are Brian and Kim Charlson in Massachusetts. Brian is the the president of Bay State Council of the Blind, ACB state affiliate. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning.
Kim Charlson, who is his better half, clearly, is the immediate past president of the American Council of the Blind, and in her day job is the executive director of the Perkins Library in Boston. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you, Eric. It's great to be here.
Yeah. We have Mark Reichert, who is ACB's first vice president, and in his day job is the acting executive director of the Association for the Education of Rehabilitation of People Who Are Blind or Visually Impaired. Did I get that right, Mark?
Yeah, you mostly got it right. That's true. I appreciate that.
Mostly.
Indeed,
all right. Welcome. And also we've got Mark Baer, who served as Senator Markey's chief of staff and legislative director for many years. He's here this morning. He's now president of Baer Strategic Consulting. Good morning, Mark.
Hey, good morning, everybody.
And last but not least, actually not last at all, Tim Powderly, who is the director of federal governmental affairs for Apple, and in a previous life worked on the House Education or Energy and Commerce Committee. Good morning, Tim.
Morning, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. And the person that really helped to champion all of this on Capitol Hill for several years and has continued his work to champion our efforts in access and equality in the technology space. We are very honored to have Senator Ed Markey with us this morning. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Eric. Thank you, and thanks as well to the American Council of the Blind, both for hosting today's event and for your incredible continuing commitment to bringing opportunities to everyone. You know, I stood next to Stevie Wonder as President Obama signed this historic law that we're here to celebrate, and it's such a delight to hear from him today. And I'm also honored to virtually share the stage with the all-star cast that you just mentioned: Mark Reichert, Kim Charleston, Brian Charleston, Tim Powderly, and Mark Baer, my former chief of staff, who was very instrumental in passing this landmark achievement for equality in America. So it is exactly 10 years ago today, President Obama signed the CVAA, or the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act, into law. So I was the principal author over in the House of Representatives, and I did it on a bipartisan basis, reaching out to Republicans so that we could ensure that we did it in a way that would be consistent with the sustainability of laws that would have to have bipartisan support. And I'm very proud of that. It remains one of my proudest achievements. The CVAA is an extension of my 4-decade commitment to the principles of opportunity, independence, and equal access for everyone. And I believe that no one should be left behind, and that technology must be accessible to everyone. It's about participation, and each of us should have the ability to participate in society to the greatest extent of our talents and our abilities that are permitted. And that's why, as society evolves, our protections for individuals with disabilities must evolve as well. By 2010, it was clear that we needed to update our understanding of accessibility in light of 21st century technologies. Just like the ADA mandated physical ramps onto buildings, we needed to require online ramps to the internet. In addition to wheelchair accessibility, we needed web accessibility. Equal opportunity demands that individuals with disabilities have full access to all of the digital and mobile innovations that allow a person to thrive in our increasingly connected society. Today, we celebrate the 10th anniversary of the CVAA, but let's not forget the House of Representatives passed the CVAA on the 20th anniversary of the ADA. And unlike previous laws that Congress had passed, which were primarily attempting to catch up to old technologies, the CVAA ensures that no one is left behind ever again when it comes to emerging technologies. The CVAA requires that smartphones, tablets, set-top boxes, or the universal application of apps and devices and services still in the mind of some 15-year-old whiz kid are designed with accessibility in the first place, not added sometime after the fact. The CVAA also expanded access to closed captioning and audio descriptions for video while ensuring that everyone can receive life-saving emergency information. Passing this legislation was truly a revolutionary achievement, and it was my honor to stand with you in that fight. But as everyone here knows, the president signing the CVAA into law was merely the beginning. And groups like the American Council of the Blind had the tall task of working with the FCC, with the great Karen Pell-Strauss, to implement this law, as well as working with industry and other stakeholders to create and promote the technology and products needed to support expanded accessibility. Thankfully, you were more than up to that challenge. Because of you, here is what is possible today. You can open an app with your voice, not just with your fingers. You can ask your phone to tell you aloud who is calling and tell it to read text messages to you. You can watch TV with captions on your iPad, laptop, and mobile phone, or you can listen to an audio description of your favorite shows. You can access web browsers that allow screen readers to read web pages to you. You can communicate through text and email with expressive voices that laugh, cry, or yell by using chat icons. You can find any program or channel, or even record a TV show using your voice-activated remote control, even if you can't see the buttons or the on-screen menu. And the engineers are working on more features as we speak, which is exactly how it should be. As the world changes with new technologies and services, we have to remember that it's never intrinsically for the better or for the worse. New technologies are only good when we animate them with human values, like equal opportunity and access for all, that reflects the best of what we are as a society. When we expand the circle of inclusion, we evolve as a people. So as we celebrate the 10th anniversary of the CVAA, I want to reaffirm my commitment to this continuing mission. Together, we will advance the work of equal opportunity and accessibility into the future. It was always my great honor to work with everyone who is on this call to put together the CVAA. It was a long process, many meetings with all of you on this call, but it was worth it. I was so glad as the chairman of telecommunications to begin the effort and then to work in 2010 to finish it so that we would have that bill signing in the Oval Office. I actually called the White House and I asked them to have a bill signing, and I've been told that it is the last bill signing that the president had in that setting before, unfortunately, the Democrats lost the majority just 3 weeks later in November of 2010. So it was a celebration of an incredible bipartisan legislative achievement. I was so proud to be there with all of you, and I'm looking forward in the years ahead of continuing my partnership with you. I'm so proud of all of you for everything that you've done, and I want to continue to be your partner in whatever efforts that you have in the future. Thank you, Eric, and thank you to everyone who is on this call.
Well, thank you very much for joining us this morning, and we look forward to continuing our work together on this and other issue areas. You've been a wonderful champion for the needs of our community, and we look forward to continuing to work with you and your very talented staff.
Thank you.
Have a good day. All right. That's a nice way to start things off. So what I thought I'd do is just ask a couple questions and sort of get things started. I'd like this to be a free-flowing conversation. There are folks on here that aren't shy, which is good. And why don't we get started actually in the great state of Massachusetts with Kim and Brian. Kim, at the time of this whole thing, I believe you were first vice president of ACB, and Brian was, I want to say, chair of the Information Access Committee, which is our technology committee inside ACB, and sort of get your thoughts on, how we were able to mobilize the blind community to go and raise our voices as a collective with members of Congress. What was the need to do that at the time? Take us back, 11, 12 years ago.
Well, thank you, Eric. And I first want to just say thank you to Senator Markey for everything that he has done, that I'm so grateful and honored that he's going to continue to be our senator. I know that that's going to be a future prediction that he will continue to be our senator, and we will get to work with him for a long time to come. It's a great honor to have him. You're a tremendous advocate in Washington, D.C., and thank you for everything you do. Eric, you're right. It was a very, very important time in the advocacy for people who are blind, because in a lot of ways, with the ADA coming along, people had started to kind of feel like, well, everything was done. The buildings were accessible, and the blind community was saying, wait just 1 second here. We don't have access to the programs and services. We don't have access to the information superhighway. We're not able to travel the path that everyone else is traveling, and we need to do something about it. And that's really what motivated our community to say, we've got to do something that's going to get us the access we need to stay up to speed with our peers, to keep our jobs, to continue to be part of a growing movement with education, and just be a part of society. I know the things that I really enjoyed from the CVAA, besides the information, the internet, and something that I barely can let go of anymore. I think I'm one of those addicted people. If I'm away from my texts or my internet for very long, I think I start to shake a little and wonder what's happening. But I have that access, and now it's possessed me, So it's everywhere, and I value it so much. But the audio description is what really is my passion, and having access to television and movies and the information that is there for all of us, because television and film is such an integral part of our society, and being able to talk about it with our friends and colleagues is huge. And being able to know what's going on and to watch the programs and understand them is there's just nothing like it. It's unbelievable. And we're getting more and more access, but it's just a small fraction of what's out there. Mm-hmm. And I don't know about you, but I know that I want more access. And so there's more to do with audio description. Yeah. The other area that took a lot of advocacy and that I'm very proud of is the National Deafblind Equipment Distribution Program. that provides equipment for lower income individuals who are both deaf and blind and have severe hearing or vision loss as well, to get access to the internet and to telecommunication services so that they can communicate and get information. Because you layer those two disabilities together, and just imagine the communication barriers that those individuals have had until the passage of the CVAA, when access to the technology was available for them to have access to information and to communicate with their families. So those are two areas where advocacy from our community, speaking about our needs, has made a tremendous difference. Brian, I bet you have some thoughts.
I sure do. It was one of my honors, and one of the hardest things I ever did was to serve on the FCC Disability Advisory Committee or Council. I can't remember what the C stood for in those days, because we then had to sit with members not only of the disabled community, but of industry in order to forge language that would allow the CVAA to be implemented. It was not an easy job to do. It required hours and hours of conference calls. I know that people who are spending so much time on Zoom today can't remember the days when all this was done by way of conference calls, but we would have 15 people on a conference call trying to hash out a language that meant different things to different people. Many, many hours of this, and finally got those up to the FCC, and much, if not all of that, was in fact implemented. Right now, I've continued on in the practice of trying to grow accessibility in this space by working with streaming services like HBO and Netflix and Hulu and others, to make sure that as things change from a broadcast world to a streaming world, that we still are active as advocates. This means that we as consumers of this technology now have a voice, and a voice that, while the CVA put in mandates for things for broadcast television, the trend has been to go more and more to streaming, which is not directly covered by the CVAA, but certainly it is in the spirit of the CVAA that these organizations like Apple TV, Apple Plus, like Disney Plus, come on to the stage with accessibility as a core value of accessing that information.
Hasn't that been cool, Brian?
That has been
to witness
absolutely spectacular to see the spirit of a law that mandates something, to create the spirit to do it because it's the right thing to do from both a commercial and a moral basis. So I'm really excited about that, excited enough that I've launched a podcast called Picture This, where we're interviewing audio describers and people who control this environment of television and streaming services to make sure we blind consumers know what's available and how to access it.
Awesome. Mr. Reichert.
Yes, sir.
So in your former life, you were my counterpart at the American Foundation for the Blind, and you led their public policy efforts, and you and I walked probably hundreds of miles, I don't know, on Capitol Hill through the period of a couple of years, trying to get more support for this, what was a white paper that became a real living, breathing piece of legislation, to get it through the legislative process. Wonder if you could hearken back to those kind of crazy days and talk a little bit about the accessibility gaps that existed within commercially available technology, consumer technology, as well as areas where there may have been actual market failures, where there was no accessibility whatsoever.
Oh gosh, thanks, Eric. I really appreciate it, and a shout out to you. Those are some fun days. They were we had some tough days, you and I, there, as we thumb wrestled with people, and we also had a blast doing that, and it was just an amazing learning experience, and just awesome to have
Amen.
a colleague and friend to
Yes.
help do that. Let me also, because I'd be remiss if I didn't do a quick shout out to my current friend and former colleague and boss, Paul Schrader, who I know is cheering us on as well, and was certainly, as I've characterized him in the past, in the 90s and earlier, a founding father, a founder, whatever, of one of them, of the movement to work on audio description in federal law. That was a long haul to make that happen. And Eric, you were talking about gaps that I'll just sort of pick up from where the Charlestons were just talking, and that is, it was so frustrating. The FCC did try to make some headway for all of us in getting just a modest little requirement for audio description on the books, and it was so frustrating to see some players in industry, particularly from the broadcasting and other communities, push back to the point where we had to go to court. And unfortunately, the courts got seduced a bit by that message that said, gee whiz, maybe you don't have the kind of power, FCC, that these idealistic, wide-eyed consumers think you do. And so, I mean, that's just one perfect example of how from a legal and legislative point of view, it was obviously necessary that we have a law in the books to clear the way of some of these kind of obstacles. But wow, I remember, so like it was yesterday, somebody coming up to me, and I will not mention her name, so now she needs to put a check in the mail, but somebody from the industry world who said to me as we were leaving one of the hearings on Capitol Hill, gee whiz, Mark, I don't really know why y'all are complaining. All you got to do is just go get yourself an iPhone. You'll be fine. And she meant it in a friendly way, but I didn't think it was very funny. And when you talk about gaps, Eric, I mean, sure, our friends at Apple definitely led the charge on, and have decades, on making products accessible and such. But consumers need choices. I'm a proud iPhone addict, but the reality of it is maybe that's not the right product for everybody. And I think we all acknowledge that. So probably the biggest gap that I would point out is a fundamental lack of choice among products. And the extent to which we had choices back in the day, you were paying a ton of extra money. Sometimes you'd pay 2 or 3 times or even more than that for the stuff that would allow you to have some modicum of access to the cool gizmos. And it would be so much more than the actual gizmo itself. It's just not fair. It's not right. And particularly with a community that by and large, is unemployed, underemployed, or doesn't participate in the job market because of all kinds of issues, discrimination being at the top of that list. There's not a lot of money that folks have to spare for that sort of thing. So I think, in short, what we tried to do was, address specific technologies like web browsers on iPhone, on cell phones, on mobile and smartphones, TV accessibility, all the things that you have been mentioned today. But fundamentally, it was about broadening the scope of choice for consumers and, frankly, leveling that playing field so that it wasn't just, to the extent we had any kind of accessibility at all, that it wasn't those folks at the high end who were able to somehow lift up all the cushions of their couches and find a way to make that happen. So those are, I think, the fundamental things we're trying to achieve. I heard that Eric Bridges may have dropped off. I don't know if we're having.
Okay, I'm here, Mark.
Oh, great.
I am here.
Great.
I apologize. We had an internet connectivity issue with my device, and now I'm at another colleague's computer. So you can never make it through one of these things without a hiccup. That's what I've learned over the last 7 months.
That's all right.
Yeah, but I'm here, and well, thank you. And to kick it over to Mark and Tim, hearing what the advocates and consumers have said, how was it that you were able to, or what were some of the challenges that you guys faced in sort of looking at the real needs that our community had and desires, and marrying those with you know, at times the very real concerns and also pushback from various, you know, industry sectors. How were the two of you able to sort of deal with that sort of challenge that often?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm happy to just say a few words, and I'm obviously interested in what Tim has to say about this as well. You know, I'm thinking about some of the hearings that we had early on, and they were really contentious.
Yeah.
Remember Jesse Acosta, you know, testifying, veteran, had been
Yes.
blinded in the Iraq War, and talking about how he couldn't get accessible emergency information. I remember, you know, members on the panel kind of going at each other about, you know, government, big government telling industry how to innovate. You know, some of the panelists sort of saying this is going to kill the American economy, the innovation spirit that we have. And then I think as time went on, and Tim was such a leader on this, you know, behind the scenes, we were talking, and, you know, just there was, I think, an overarching, you know, understanding, or at least a common foundation, that this is a value and an important part of what we want as a society, right? Accessibility and the ability of everybody to participate according to their talents and interests and maximizing their potential. And so if we could start with that kind of general understanding, there's a lot of head nodding, you know, of course, among all the stakeholders on at least that level. Then it was, okay, well, then how do we do it? And then you know, Brian talked about all these conference calls at the FCC, you know, so the process of actually taking those values that people were agreed upon to actually translating into legislative language is a real art. And of course, Tim was a big leader in that area.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mark. As were you, obviously the ringleader. But to Eric's question, I think, you know, we were staffers, and, you know, Mark worked for Senator Markey, and I worked for, at the time, for Chairman Waxman, and they had given us pretty clear orders to get her done. And the good news was, even with all the various stakeholders who might have been opposed to some of this stuff at the staff level, we had good relationships across the hill and across the aisle. And there was a lot of people that were committed to getting this done, and went through the hard work of, you know, sorting out the various interests and getting to yes. And that includes, you know, David Quinalty and Neil Freed, Jessica Rosenworcel, Alex Hohn-Sarek. All those folks worked really hard, Republicans and Democrats, to make it happen, because at the end of the day, it was painfully obvious to us that the law needed to be updated, and it needed to be updated in a way that, you know, hopefully was durable, looking down the road. So I think that was really what got us there, and then a whole lot of patience.
Yeah, lots and lots. I remember meetings on the Hill that would have sometimes 20 to 25, 30 people in them, bringing in various parts of industry to meet, to go over language, and you know, just the challenge that this legislation presented, because it didn't, you know, just look at the wireless or wireline. You know, there wasn't like a narrow swath of coverage that we were looking for. We wanted to be future thinking and also deal with the needs of the day. And so it was all of the industry associations, right? The alphabet soup of them, and then individual companies that wanted to negotiate as well. And then for the most part, it was, I guess it was 5 of us, right, Mark, that were really the consistent negotiators on behalf of the advocates. So,
you know, it's interesting. I remember, you know, it was Mark, you referenced the audio description in the court case. And I remember having a conversation offline after one of the hearings with CBS and John Orlando. And, you know, CBS had continued to do audio description on some of its programming, on some of its popular programming, even though they didn't have to. by law. And that, for me was a great, argument to say, look, these guys are doing it anyway, and it's not onerous. So, let's make it required across the board. So there were a lot of these little conversations here and there, with industry folks, and again, there was this kind of common understanding that, look, we want to get this done. I was having, then how do we do it specifically? And that, Tim really spoke to that. And I was having a conversation earlier this week with a guy who's been with the IEEE, the big engineering association, for quite a long time. And I told him this. It was funny because I said, I'm going to do this Facebook Live, talk about this big accessibility bill. And it's, that's now the law, and how the engineers really played a big part in figuring out from a technology standpoint how to do it. Hey, this is a cool engineering problem, right? This is a great, so it was just it was really inspiring to watch this full court press with everybody in motion and all heading in the right direction.
I'm curious, gentlemen, about compromises, the very nature of advocating for a concept and trying to get as close to consensus as you possibly can in that process. How did the advocates have to compromise to get it over the finishing line?
I remember a meeting in our office with Eric and Mark and KPS and I think somebody else, where they were expressing some extreme displeasure at where some of the language was going. And we had then a conversation in terms of we can pass a law, and we can pass a bill through the House of Representatives, but if you want to pass a law and get it through the Senate, we're gonna have to make some changes. So let's start talking about that. And again, we had our principles and our red lines from our bosses, but we just had to work through it. And we also knew, at least I felt, that we had the sort of political upper hand, in the sense there was a bit of a feeling of inevitability, so we could probably reach a little bit in order to get that done.
Did industry themselves have to make some compromises?
Oh, I think so. I mean, the hardest two things that I remember having to work on were sort of the scope of the bill, i.e., who's in, who's out, and then the legal standard. Which folks remember, there was readily achievable and undue burden, and we upped it a little bit, and that was a compromise as well.
One noteworthy thing that took place during the negotiations that actually in his video Stevie Wonder referenced was the introduction of the third generation iPhone that incorporated the voice over screen reader into the operating system. We had been, I think, struggling to have fruitful discussions with industry concerning built-in access and wanting it not to cost more for us, which at the time, as you guys will recall, we could go out and buy a smartphone, but then had to spend likely an equal amount of money for software to then load on the phone to make it accessible. And so having Apple introduce this phone, but not just any phone, the coolest phone on the planet that had virtually no buttons on it, that was completely accessible, helped in our efforts. When you say, Mark Reichert, in terms of being able to move the ball forward with negotiations, it served as like a proof of concept.
Well, yeah, yes, sir. And this is a funny kind of fun dynamic. And oh gosh, Powderly just touched on it a second ago, and that's as did Mark Baer. You'd always hear all these stories about how we can't do it, and then there was always someone in their camp who would sort of show up and not just say, gee whiz, I think we can if we put our minds to it. Well, I don't know what you're talking about. We've been doing it for a couple of years. And from an advocate's point of view, maybe this is not the most professional reaction I had, but I was just cheering them on. It's fun to see their own people kind of rip the rug out from underneath some of those folks who are really on occasion, and thank God they were, this was a minority of them, but who could really kind of get a little edgy about why they couldn't do what they could do. I'm going to be selfish for a second, since Brian Charlson led me into this temptation by asking Tim and Mark this question. And this is most avowedly not a partisan political question. I really want to know how you would react to this. I mean, I certainly was told 10 years ago, you know what, be grateful that this happened at this particular time. The planets were just aligned in just the right way. Not sure we could have gotten it done before or since. And there's such a overwhelming sense of cynicism out there, even today, as some of us who spend, frankly, hopefully earning a paycheck, in part at least, doing advocacy work. What can you, how can you encourage us, but certainly the folks who tuned in to this program, that, that's not a flash in the pan. Those days are over, the days of wine and roses of getting something that significant like the CVAA done. Or if it's true that we can't expect that, what should we be focusing on instead?
Well, one thing I would say about that is actually to think about the original ADA, that 30 years ago, that was signed by President H.W. Bush, obviously a Republican president. So I am optimistic about continuing to move this issue forward as technology further evolves. And part of that is because I do think it is an American value, that accessibility is something that maximizing your potential, all of those things are really a plank in our kind of collective consciousness that doesn't change from administration to administration, or who has the majority in one house or the other. And I think kind of taking that degree of detail, finer, it relates to like similarity and understanding. I feel like, people have family members, who are blind, or people have, friends who are deaf or hard of hearing. And, that's very powerful. It's very powerful for policymakers across the policy agenda. So I'm always, advising and talking to people who want to move things to say, like, look, are there any members who have members of Congress, who particularly relate to this issue? Alzheimer's disease, another issue that Senator Markey has been active on for so long. Members across the spectrum politically have personal experiences with that, which isn't to say that that's the only way to move legislation, as if a member of Congress actually has a personal experience with this. But on this issue of accessibility and continuing to generate momentum, it is such a critical aspect of it. And I don't think that's going to be affected by partisanship.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I think that's really great to hear, Mark. As we look to the future, and as we think about, as advocates, about what are the next steps that we need to take to ensure that the progress we've made in the last 10 years is going to continue into the future. Because I think you're absolutely right that our society and our non-disabled colleagues have an expectation. They just believe that things are going to be accessible for us. They see captioning everywhere they go, with the bars, the gyms, the fitness clubs, and they know that's for deaf people, but I can use it too. It helps me. And they start to understand that the pieces of accessibility that they are in touch with and they understand are there for a reason, and they understand why they're there, and they think that's the right thing to do. Yeah. And I think it's more universal now, as we've gotten 30 years into the ADA, that, for the next generation of the CVAA, I think that what we're looking to do is hopefully going to be an easier row to hoe than Eric and Mark and Tim and Mark, all of you guys had 10 years ago. That's my hope anyway. Hopefully I'm not naive. I think that it's going to be a different kind of story in the next generation for our work.
Yeah, I agree completely with that.
It's my hope as well. And a lot of what we've accomplished is actually proving that this work can be done, and it can be done well. And the products aren't just made accessible, but they're actually made usable. And so much of what had occurred before 2010 was, it was extraordinarily uneven. And you know, the deaf and hard of hearing community had a bit of a head start, at least you know, in the legislative and in the regulatory end of things with captioning and all of that. And so the CVAA was really the blindness community, our first really marker to put down. And it would be my hope and expectation that, you know,
and we lose Art. We lost him again, I think.
Yeah. So
Mid-phrase.
have been impacted by the CVAA in a
There you
collaborative
go.
fashion, right? And that is in our culture as an organization. I believe that is the only way that we can see true change is through being engaged, being at the table with companies like, frankly, like Apple, like Comcast, like Microsoft, and many others that build products that and provide services that frankly change the world. They help with productivity, entertainment, education, employment, all of that. And so from my perspective, it would be my expectation that things will, it's not going to be a smooth road. It'll be bumpy. It's the nature of technology and the journey that we're all on here. But I would certainly expect that given we have this marker down, that industry will be more willing and positive in working with us on future needed advancements, be they either regulatory or from a legislative standpoint.
Well, and Eric, this is Mark. I guess somebody said earlier today, and I think it's worth highlighting, that some of us who spend a lot of our time fiddling around with trying to find just the right word to propose to our former staff colleagues on Capitol Hill that we have with us today, because we think we've chosen just the right term of art. I mean, that all that stuff is fine and all of that. At some point, though, and I've tried to suggest this to folks who, again, in our community and frankly just broadly, who gets maybe a little too cynical about legislative process, is those words are important, but the most important thing is that the world, and in this particular case, the stakeholders we care about, namely industry, particularly back then, saw that A, there was a clear need, and B, that the advocates weren't going away. And then C, my gosh, we got a law done. Maybe it wasn't the most perfect specimen. There is no such thing as a perfect law. By definition, there will be compromises. So therefore, it means just about everybody's going to be a little bit unhappy with it. And that's fine, because what it shows ultimately, though, is a change in direction. Whatever that law might say, that's almost one separate thing. It's really about changing the whole dynamic. And I think, we would be remiss if we didn't recall that we had definitely some friends in industry, and we also definitely did not. And I think there are a lot more friends today. And I think that, it's a decade later, and people change, people evolve. Lord knows I do. And so not only have we changed some hearts and minds, but I think the overall expectation is, on the friendly side, let's do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And on sort of that flip cynical side, holy mackerel, we don't want to go through that again. We don't want to have all of those crazy regulations coming down the pike. I guess we'd better start to anticipate what folks' needs are and do something about them. So it's a dialectical process.
One of the things that strike me through all this is, and this goes back to something Senator Markey said, and that was that this was intended to be a law that didn't make up for what we lost over the past 10 years, but to set up something that would have lasting value and would have a bit of evergreen nature to it. Do we think that, in fact, things have changed in such a way since 10 years ago that a refresh of some of the aspects of the CVAA are necessary? Again, as I said earlier, streaming services are not directly covered by the CVAA unless those streaming services are built into a piece of hardware. So again, there's going to be little twists and turns that we need to stay on top of to make sure that it doesn't disrail the spirit of the CVAA. One of the things that concerns me is this idea of two-way communication. I have on my arm here a Libra glucose monitor, and I swipe my smartphone across it. It gathers the data from it, and it transmits it to my healthcare worker. How important is that process to being accessible? When it comes to the future of telehealth and the importance of maybe it's not literally two ways on the same, in the same product / platform, but it certainly is a two-way communication with healthcare providers. Should the CVAA extend into that area?
Yes, yes, and yes.
Absolutely.
I think you raised some great points.
Yes.
Being able to monitor and manage one's own healthcare is, it always has been so critical, but now we have devices, electronic devices that have the ability to give us the information that we need. And in fact, I've got something on my wrist right now, the Apple Watch, that can help out with a number of different things. But
track all those steps you make on Capitol Hill, for instance.
that's right. That's right. But you know, there are a number. There's a whole universe of devices out there, and frankly, there's the specter of diabetes and diabetic retinopathy that is very real in our community. And you know, how do we deal with the increasing number of folks that are losing their vision as a result of diabetes? And how do we, you know, how do we as an organization that has many members who are diabetic, how do we stand up for them on their behalf, and frankly, the broader community's behalf, to work with the companies, but also look at other advocacy alternatives in the process. So that's a great area to raise, Brian. It's a neat.
Well, this little device on my arm has allowed me to lose 70 pounds this year, and has taken me from an insulin-dependent person to an insulin-free person. So I'm
Good for you.
passionate about how these things work, and they work primarily as a way to communicate two ways between you and your healthcare provider, to really understand what these devices tell you and how to implement them in your future health. So I really do think that it's a telecommunication question and ought to be embraced by the CVAA.
There's just no question about it. And I have to say that, you know, one of the arguments that we had quite frequently was the same people who would object to what we were trying to do, saying you all are trying to do something that will stifle innovation, were the same people who wanted to put legal hedges around things to lock us into a certain perspective. So in other words, the very people who were sort of saying you advocates are wanting to kind of shut us all down, were some of them the same people who were trying to say, let's write this in such a way that it's kind of makes things antiquated. I'll only give you one example, and this actually turned out more in the Federal Communications Commission's sort of implementing side of things. They had to do what they had to do based on the law that they were given. But this business of devices or gizmos that have a primary purpose to do a certain thing, how in the world in the 21st century, to say nothing about, you know, the year 2021 coming up, are we going to talk about whether this particular or that particular thing has a primary purpose to communicate, or is a medical device, or is a refrigerator, or is a whatever? And I think one of the fundamental things that we ought to be thinking about is how we, you know, we're not a bunch of radicals here. We're not trying to completely throw out the Communications Act or the way that the FCC has done certain things, but how do we find a way to legally embrace a broader sense of things that's an inclusive set of definitions and scope that also, yes, does create the kind of compromises that we know we're going to be expected to make. And so it's like that fulcrum keeps moving, and I think that's how public policy evolves, and on an incremental basis. The best public policy is incremental, and so hopefully we can do that.
Absolutely. Well, hey, we're running out of time here, but I wanted to give the opportunity for Mark Baer and Potterly to share any final thoughts the two of you might have. Again, naturally, leave it to the advocates to spend most of the time chatting about stuff. But
well, they pay us by the word, not by the hour. So.
Well, look, I'll just say that it was a real honor and a privilege to be working with you guys. It was a great team effort, bipartisan. Yes, it was difficult, but doing anything of substance is hard. It takes time. I think there sometimes needs to be some expectations management at the beginning, but for people who aren't used to, your organizations, obviously you're on the front lines, but maybe members aren't really used to or have a good frame of reference on how long things can take. I mean, our system is set up for that, to allow for all these different inputs. But this was just, from my perspective, one of my highlights of my 20 years in the House and the Senate working up there. And, you guys made it fun through all the challenges that we had and the minutiae sometimes, but we really stuck together. And I think, like, Tim referenced his commitment to get it done. And, did a beautiful thing. I just remember, a couple of brief stories. One was, and Mark started talking about this, about innovation. It was kind of like, look, guys, you're going to start marketing the fact that your equipment is accessible, and you're going to do commercials with people. And really, right away, that started happening. And I think that our culture has moved a lot in the last 10 years with respect to showing in media and in film, people who are blind or people who are deaf or who have vision impairments and all the things that they're achieving. And that wasn't happening as much back in the lead up to the CVAA, and even captions, like Kim was pointing out, like, people rely on those. I mean, statistics show on online video, majorities of people are watching the captions, or reading the captions, I should say, at least in the beginning. So things have changed, and yeah, there's more to do. We keep, kind of, technology marches on, and we want to make sure that accessibility is a feature always in the design process, not a bolt-on. So, there's more work to do, and but yet I'm still really confident of the team, and which has expanded, I'm sure, since then, being able to achieve it. So thank you again for having me. It's been great to have this opportunity to talk about this again.
Wonderful that you could join us this morning.
Yeah, I would say very much the same. First of all, thank you sincerely for having me. I was only lucky enough to work on the Hill for 4 years, and this was 100% the most impactful, meaningful thing that I could even imagine of doing. When I started working there, I actually have a copy of the bill in my office at work because I'm really proud. I'm really proud of it. And I didn't work at Apple then. Obviously, I went after, but I do remember, to Mark's point earlier, and I'm very, very proud to work at Apple, but I didn't have an iPhone. And when some people would say, well, we can't do this, we can't do that, and I'd say, well, your iPhone, it's built right in. And then they would say, well, it's a business decision, and then you'd be able to capture them in. And it was, now I see from this side what a commitment it is the company has to this, and I'm very, very proud of that as well.
Absolutely.
And my last point, I think, to Eric's question was, in terms of going forward, I see it now. We got that done in many ways, but there were real strong champions on the Hill. Senator Markey is a giant in the field, and Congressman Waxman was terrific too. But I think it's important for the community and for the advocates to continue to develop new champions. The people of the great state of Massachusetts look like they're going to send Ed back for 6 years, which is great. But it takes a little bit more of a village. So that's where I would focus time.
Good stuff.
Good point. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Right on. Well, hey, before we go, I would be remiss if I didn't recognize a coalition, and we've actually referenced their names at various points during this conversation, but the Coalition of Organizations for Accessible Technology, known as COAT, or the COAT Coalition. I think Mark Reichert, you and I used to joke, get your coat on. It was a coalition that had of a couple hundred organizations. It was led by 5 organizations on its steering committee, and those 5 organizations had representatives that worked with Mark Baer and Tim Powderly, and I'd like very much to recognize them. The American Foundation for the Blind was represented by Mark Reichert. I had the great honor of representing the American Council of the Blind. The American Association of People with Disabilities, AAPD, was represented by Jennifer Simpson. And the National Association of the Deaf was represented by Rosaline Crawford. Communication Services for the Deaf was represented by Karen Pelt-Strauss, and Karen played a really fascinating role in this whole thing, serving as a significant initial drafter of the white paper that would become the CVAA, and working as a steering committee member of COPE, but then leaving in, what was it, early 2010, Mark, before the bills began to really move. She left to go to the FCC, where she then had the significant challenge of implementing this, and did a wonderful job. And just as a side note, she's being honored this afternoon by the FCC. She's being given the Chairman's AAA Award for accessibility, and it's a great honor. She's certainly deserving, and somebody that I respect and admire greatly. And then last but not least, Lisa Hamlin, who represented the Hearing Loss Association of America. So that was the group that went to Capitol Hill, went to the FCC, constantly to advocate for the bill's passage, as well as the implementation of the law at the commission. So want to thank each one of them for all the work that they did. I learned a lot through this process. I did not have a communications law background. I'm not an attorney. I came from Capitol Hill, where I'd worked for a member of Congress. The closest thing I had was knowledge about the digital TV transition, which had been pushed off by a couple of years, and it was not going well. But I learned a ton. I learned a ton from Karen and all the others, but I also learned a lot from Mark Reichert. And the amount of knowledge that he and the American Foundation for the Blind had at the time regarding technology policy was certainly helpful for me. I was pretty young, and this continues to be and will be a career highlight.
Man, you don't know what paybacks are like. It's not fair for you to sneak up on a guy and make him choked up on Facebook Live, man. Thank you very much.
Well, hey, thank you so much, guys, for joining us. Thank you to all the folks out in Facebook land for hanging in and listening to our discussion. Remember acb.org for all the information you want or need regarding the American Council of the Blind. If you're having advocacy issues and needing assistance, please feel free to email us at advocacy@acb.org. As we have a tendency to say here on our podcasts and Facebook Lives, keep advocating. Take care.